Okay, so thank you for reconvening. We're now going to take up our Foundation SRS 101, which is item 7 on the agenda. So Chelsea?
Sure, thank you, Eric. So we thought we would give you guys the two toughest items for discussion first thing on day 1 of this meeting. So you have made very good progress on the employee-worker discussion, and now we're going to tackle the foundation standard. So first, I would thank you for all of those of you who gave input ahead of the meeting. Your comments are really valuable, and it gives us time to really work through and do them justice. We had mostly very positive feedback from members coming through ahead of the session. We had one member who raised a couple of more substantive comments, and we will address those for discussion with the group today. So these sessions for approval on the individual draft documents, we are going to present them as follows. First, a brief summary of the changes, which are reflected as well in your item 05 paper, the summary of changes. Then we will share back our synthesis of the GSSB feedback received to date ahead of the meeting. And we are going to go through only the more major or substantive comments. So as Eric mentioned earlier, we had from you guys some good minor suggestions on clarification of wording, some very good eagle-eyed reading, spotting some grammar mistakes or an extra period at one point in the documents. Those things we will just adjust on our own offline. And at that point, we will open it up for the floor for any additional comments or input, substantive changes or comments. And then I will turn it over to Eric to lead you through a discussion on those more major points, and then we'll close hopefully with a note of any modifications that the group wants to see before the drafts can be approved for public exposure. Any questions before we get started?
Let's go.
Okay. So first, a brief summary of the changes that we've made affecting all standards that we will see for the rest of the day. So we have revised the section headings as followed up after the 3rd of March conference call with the GSSB. We now have 3 rather sensibly named sections: reporting requirements, reporting recommendations, and guidance. And we have also updated some of the text in the introduction sections around the effective date and normative references to make these more clear, following suggestions for wording that came out of the GSSB meeting. So for example, earlier adoption of the standards is encouraged under the effective date, and language under normative references, which is closer aligned to ISO language there. On the foundation standard specifically, since you last looked at this standard, we have included a rather high-level introduction section on sustainability reporting. This is not meant to replace an eventual foreword, which could be added into the standard after the public exposure draft. We have also, following comments and suggestions from the group on the 3rd of March, we have moved the reporting principles together with their guidance up front. So this is now the first section in the standard. Previously, if you remember, it was at the end of the standard. We have added some additional clarification to the explanation of topic boundary, and particularly topic boundary when defined as outside of the organization. And we will have a discussion point for this. There were a couple comments related to this wording. We have made some more minor changes in the general reporting process following comments that came through on the 3rd of March teleconference, and then a few specific inputs from GSSB members. And we have also added more specificity on how the standards can be referenced, in that they can be referenced only in the 3 claim options which are provided in the standards. And that was following as well comments from that teleconference. We have revised the in accordance section to make it more clear that all reporting requirements, not only reporting those disclosures, are mandatory. And this was the consensus that we reached after a rather animated and very interesting discussion with the GSSB on the 3rd of March. And that has since been incorporated into the drafts. We also have additional guidance on how to select a disclosure for each material topic if an organization is reporting on the core option. And that was probably an oversight on the standards division part that one GSSB member had pointed out. We have revised the guidance text around the SRS reference claim, and we've also included an example claim statement, or what that would look like, to help organizations understand how to formulate that text. And then just a note of clarification, we realized that we had perhaps not made it explicitly clear to the GSSB discussions that following the change, one of our content clarifications around the use of the sector supplements, it is no longer explicitly required in these drafts that organizations need to use the sector supplements to be in accordance. It is, however, recommended to use them to identify the material topics. And of course, this is an issue that could be revised or reopened in the future as our sector program hopefully gets underway in the near future. So feedback we had ahead of the meeting from the GSSB. We had 2 points of feedback related to the definition or the description of impacts. So previously we had tried to clarify a common misconception in G4, which was the interpretation of impacts as impacts on the organization itself and only on itself. And possibly we went a bit too far in that wording. So there was a suggestion made by GSSB members, 2 members, and possibly a third at an earlier date, that we need to perhaps modify and soften this to say that impacts in this context do not refer only to consequences for the organization itself, rather than saying impacts in this context do not refer to consequences for the organization itself. And this is line 254 in your draft. So at this point, I will ask Eric, would you like me to run through these issues all together and then open it up for discussion, or do you want to take them one at a time?
No, let's just take them one at a time. Dwight?
What a difference a word makes. That changes the meaning 100%. It's a 180-degree change. The whole concept, I think, of sustainability reporting is the contribution to sustainable development and to the effect of the organization on others and on society. By putting that word only there, it sort of indicates that the real purpose is the opposite of that. It's to see what is the success of the country with relationship to its own objectives. And so I think that is awful. I mean awful as a change, because we have a problem, I think, in terms of the meaning of sustainability. And whether we're talking about the longevity or success of an organization versus the ability of a society to do well. And I think that this changes that meaning.
Michael?
I think you might be overstating it there just a tad. This changes at 180 degrees. It just incorporates implications for the entity as well as implications for those outside. It's not an attempt to try and say it is only for the organisation. It's saying it's the impact outside and the implication for the organisation. That's all it's doing. And I think that's quite appropriate, because the organisation is part of the greater system in which sustainability has to thrive.
Judy?
I think, to my mind, the problem is that you've got the first sentence of this definition that says this is what impacts means, and then the second sentence means impacts doesn't mean something else. I think if you do want to include consequences to the organization itself, that should be included in the first sentence, and then we can have that conversation. I don't agree that it changes the meaning 180 degrees, but I think it muddies things significantly to put this word in the second sentence.
Anybody else have a view? Oh, I'm sorry. Michael, go ahead.
Just to Judy's point, I'd reiterate what I said before, that it is already, I think, in the first sentence, implications for the organisation, because the organisation is a participant in sustainable development. So I think it's already there. It's not excluded by the first sentence. The second sentence is just clarifying that that's the case. That's in my mind.
Personally, I could live without the second sentence, but, you know. I mean, that's the question, is whether it's actually clarifying anything, or as was noted, whether it muddies it. Daniel?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I would not include the second sentence, because it also suggests that we're interpreting it in a way that I wouldn't interpret impacts. So I would remove the second sentence.
Dilemma?
I cannot live without the second sentence because it clarifies to organizations that we are talking about their effects on society, environment, and in the economy. But I do agree with Dwight. It changed everything, the inclusion of this word.
I'm mystified by that, but Bastian, you were going to say something?
Chelsea was referring to the introduction of the foundation standard, and advice that we've gotten from external parties that we've engaged in the process of writing that introduction was, don't describe what this is about by saying what it is not. Because we've been, over time, that's one of the main feedbacks we've gotten on that section, is over time GI has built contents around what sustainability reporting is, and we've then tried to gain back our core identity by saying what it is not. And that is actually was very, very much confusing. We tried to, in many other instances, to address this issue. This is one where this is still coming up. And the question from standards division's perspective is also maybe the second sentence is actually not adding enough and confusing more than it is adding. So considering to delete it, and whether this holds together just with the first sentence as well.
Dwight?
To help demystify what I said, the word only would be read as being something referring to a statement that was consistent. So you would say the impacts. If the first sentence was discussing the impacts that were of consequence to the organization, and then the second sentence said these impacts don't refer only to the organization, they then refer to the society as large, only would make sense, but only will be interpreted as saying that the first sentence is about impacts on the organization. That's just the way the English language works. So I hope I'm demystifying this. And the problem is it's creating the idea in that second sentence that it is about the consequences for the organization. And the problem we have in the world right now, and I think a problem that is good today, but will become a very serious problem for the GRI in the future, is this distinction between what's good for the organization and what's good for society. And if you're using sustainability to fudge that distinction, as I think we do, then this helps to create that fudge. And I think the original sentence was to help clarify that we're talking about sustainable development. And to the extent that an organization's well off because of sustainable development, and I think in a lot of cases that is by definition true, that's fine. But when there is, but to say that there's no difference between the sustainability of an organization and sustainable development, well, there is, and it's important to indicate that there is. So I think that it would be better to have the second sentence, but not with the word only.
Simeon?
Thanks. I think the second sentence is actually wrong as well if we remove the word only, because I think impact as a consequence to the organization itself is an important aspect that companies need to discuss. Just for example, climate change is one. Organizations contribute to climate change through their emissions, but then the change in climate also impact the company itself, and it's very much in totality a part of sustainability or sustainable development of the organization. And a lot of companies describe that in the sustainability reporting efforts. So I think the second sentence is really problematic one way or the other. So I'm really in favor of deleting it.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
If you refer to the last EU communication, I thought that the impact meant the impact of the company. I mean, CSR is defined as the impact of the company on its outside world. And the consequences of this impact on the company are designed as potential risk or opportunities. So from a EU point of view, I would suppress it. That definition is not coherent with the EU definition, and as a common, common understanding, I would suppress a sentence too, because I think it's wrong, as you said, Simon.
Samantha?
We are talking here about the definition of impacts. We are not talking about the risks that the organization could face by not managing some impacts. So this is only a definition of impacts, which helps the organization to better define the boundaries and the materiality, to identify their materiality topics, even helps the companies to ask for their stakeholders, because the standard will have a common understanding of the term impact. So it's just like that, definition of impact. And even my organization, which is a consultants company, has a very fuzzy interpretation of the materiality principle when supporting companies to report their sustainability, economic, environment, and social aspects. And we've done some research on materiality exercise among our clients, and 85% of our clients are confusing this definition of impacts. They're approaching impacts as impacts to their organizations, or the impacts that the organization could make on the financial system, for instance. So here we are talking about only the definition of impacts, leading the company to define whatever is material for them or not. And then in other sections, or even by applying the materiality exercise, the company could raise the risks for the company from social, environmental, and economic aspects. It's in another place. So I do agree with you, Simon, that there are some impacts to the organizations due to environmental aspects or social elements. But here we are just defining impacts, helping the companies to better define what the effect of a company on 3 dimensions of the sustainability.
So, not seeing anyone else, so we're already over time for this item. I think the suggestion has been that, we can either not insert only, we could insert only, or we could delete that second sentence as being redundant to what is said in the first sentence, which is impacts on the economy, environment, and or society, and eliminate the potential ambiguity of further defining impacts do not refer to something or only refer to something. So, so can I just have some commentary on the consequences in someone's mind as to deleting the second sentence as being potentially just redundant to the first sentence?
Well, you proposed 3 alternatives. I would propose a 4th, which is you could read. No, it's not risible. It's actually I think that you can redraft the second sentence in a way that basically explains that it's about the societal interests, and to the extent that the organization is part of society and has an interest in the sustainability of society, and presumably it would, that it's those kind of impacts and not specifically to the organization's goals and achieving its objective or something like this. There is a very big problem. It is sustainable development is related to the societal interest, not to the organization's interest. I think you can probably recast the sentence in a way that takes some of these concerns into account. And I think that's the first thing. The second thing is this is a big issue. This is not a small editing thing. This is a major issue. And it gets to this sustainability versus sustainable development issue. What I would suggest we do is come back to this with I will think about a recast sentence, but I'm not going to be able to do it while everybody in the room is looking at me in the middle of this. But I think certainly today we could come back with a recast sentence. I think we should revisit it.
Salama? Robin? Stian?
My proposal is to stay with the text as it is in item 7, line 252 to 256. It addresses exactly what we've heard here. It says the impacts in this context does not refer to consequences for the organization itself, such as financial costs or reputational costs. Instead, the term refers to the organization's contribution, positive or negative, to sustainable development. And that addresses exactly what the concerns have been raised here, so why change the text?
I'm sorry, Daniel?
Yeah, I didn't realize that was how that text was worded. I agree with that. I think I would erase the last sentence. And I could live, if someone really needed to have the impacts to the organization in, we could modify the last sentence as impacts in this context may also include consequences to the organization. I would not include that, but I could live with that if someone thought that were really, really important to have.
Chelsea?
Just a clarification for those of you who do not have the text in front of you. I should have mentioned the red is the change from the text that's in the documents today. So that is the existing text, which is guidance around the materiality principle. And that was one of the content clarification issues, was this understanding of impacts being internally focused versus externally focused. So the only change from the draft that you all received 2 weeks ago and looked at is the suggestion from some members to add that red word only, which is clearly not just a minor editing issue.
Other comments? Judy?
Just quickly, I just want to make sure, am I not looking at the right document then? If what Chelsea is saying is correct, I'm looking at what I think is item 7, page 13.
Yep.
Lines, what's Stian quoted, lines 254 to 256. Is that not suggested language, or is that, because that's different from what we see here? I just want to make sure I'm not reading the documents incorrectly. Yeah.
And only as the suggested wording, or this whole sentence? That's highlighted in blue on the document, line 254 to 256.
Yeah, that's correct. The suggestion from GSSB members ahead of the call was to add in this only, and I will have to double check. I think there are a couple places in the foundation standard where we refer to impacts, and it might be that this text is from the other one. So I will double check that while you take further comments.
Okay, Kirsten?
As this is guidance, I think we spend way too much time on discussing this, and suggest to send this back to the standards department to evaluate. It's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you. Jürgen? Demi?
The if we go with the second sentence, definitely we need to delete this only because this is wrong. And then also I recommend to delete this bracket, such as financial cost or reputation and risks. If we consider the climate change, it's not just a financial cost or reputation or risk, it's a big business risk. So I think it's kind of a, the issue is kind of degraded. So.
Okay, Michael?
I'd agree with taking out the first words that Robin suggested in applying the materiality principle, because it probably is just a general definition of impact, so it depends where it's coming. But I also agree with Dwight that this second sentence could probably be reworded to everyone's satisfaction. I think it probably is worth giving a try, drawing out the distinction between sustainable development and the sustainability of an organisation, because I think that is a big problem today. Even though it is in guidance, it does seem to be people misinterpreting it. So anyhow, I'd be happy to give it a go with Dwight, but if that doesn't work, then I'd take the sentence out, would be my fallback position.
Okay. Dwight?
Well, I'd be happy to give a go with it with Michael, but if it doesn't work, then I'd be very happy to keep the original sentence in. The thing is, if you look at least in one context, in Chelsea, there might be others, but in the context on page 13, which it doesn't read quite like that because it's inverted, it's really good guidance. I mean, that it is guidance, but it's good guidance. It tells you how, and citing the specific things, financial costs and reputational risks are clearly things that are negative impacts on the organization that are not necessarily or maybe even ever impacts on society as a whole. So it provides a good example of something that is to the organization, and then you have the examples. I think it works. I think it's very good, and in the world we live in, I think it's very necessary guidance.
Chelsea?
Just a clarification on the line numbers. We have two places in the foundation standard where this sentence appears, and I mistakenly gave you the incorrect line numbers. This text itself comes from line 523, which is underneath the identifying and reporting on material topics. So that sentence is, of course, we've tried to align the language in places where we refer to the same definition. So any change that the GSSB agrees on, we would carry through in other cases where we have provided this clarification around impacts in guidance. So apologies for that incorrect line number.
Any other comments? Okay, so I would suggest that, if we have a member or two that would like today to take a stab at how they would suggest using this or suggest the wording for this guidance on this important topic, which I don't disagree with at all. We can do that, but we have to revisit it, preferably today. But this will actually get into another question that we have about guidance overall and eventually be responsive, I think, Kirsten, to your challenge around how much time we're spending on guidance versus disclosure. So we'll do that. Okay, next, Chelsea.
Okay, so that was the easy one, folks. Moving on, we had a couple of comments related, as we expected, to the wording around topic boundary. And this is a tricky issue that we've struggled with internally to get the wording correct, and we had modified this since the 3rd of March conference call. We had two suggestions coming in from GSSB members. One was a relatively minor clarification point, which was in this second bullet point to clarify. We previously had said even if it has not contributed to that impact, and this is a very I think, valuable clarification to replace it with the organization. This is highlighted in red for you. And then we've added in a little bit of clarification based on a comment from a GSSB member below that, the text in red, to make it more clear how topic boundary should be different from reporting boundary in this confusion following through from G3 and previously. So this is a very slightly modified version of what we have in the foundation standard today that you saw 2 weeks ago. We had two members with comments here. We also had, I think Michael Nugent suggested some alternative wording to try and simplify this further, and I'll put that up on the following slide to share with you. And this is a revised wording that I think tries to, and Michael, feel free to jump in here, to make less of a distinction between contributing to and being linked to an impact.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I suggested this because I was rather confused about what the difference is between contributed to and linked to. I just didn't understand what linked to meant, really. So I guess I tried to conflate contribute to and link to because, well, basically because I don't see the distinction between them. If that distinction could be explained, then I'd be happy to go back to the old wording, I guess. But I just don't get it, what linked to means.
Dwight?
Yeah, I had some concerns and comments about this and the boundary. What we're trying to align with is two international instruments, the OECD guidelines and the United Nations guiding principles. And neither one of these things gets that right. The thing that determines the boundaries is adverse impacts. Well, I would say adverse impacts. You could also say positive impacts, but I think the issue is the adverse impacts that are caused, contributed to, or linked to the organization. So the first thing is you have the notion of cause, and the thing the organization causes is something that can be outside of the boundaries of the activities of the organization because it can cause something directly and alone. The idea of contributed to, if you go back to that other slide, the original slide, was wrong because it said the organization is involved because the impact is directly linked to its operations process by business, even if the organization has not contributed. No, that part's right. It's can you give me the reference on the?
Sure, it's line 560, 562.
Okay, hang on. Okay, the first bullet says in line 562, the organization has contributed to or is seen as contributing to an impact through its activities or decisions, but this impact has been caused directly by another party. Well, that captures some of the situations, but there are situations, for instance, where the organization the contribution is because the organization isn't the sole cause of the negative impact. So there are other organizations doing the same thing that are bad, that is causing an adverse impact. And it's not necessarily this thing where you have it through another party. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So you have that problem too. But I think what we're trying to do is align to an international concept. And I think you have to add cause and you have to broaden contribute. And the link to is very important because you're known by the company you keep. And the concept of link to is also understood because you have a choice. And you have a choice as to who your business relationships are. And even if you are not necessarily contributing to an adverse impact that they cause, the fact that your relationship puts you in a formal link with an adverse impact, this is something that causes it triggers responsibility. It's a trigger for responsibility, and therefore the linked is an issue. And actually, what the big debate is in terms of, say, supply chains, is when is an activity, when is one enterprise contributing to an adverse impact, and when is it linked to an adverse impact in the supply chain? Generally, the thinking is if you have very bad purchasing practices, and you're driving the price down, and this is causing the supplier to violate the human rights of workers, there's a contributing factor. And some say, well, no, you have to define that more clearly, and if that isn't defined more clearly, then you're dealing with a link to factor. Now, what's the difference? The expectation is if you're contributing to something, you have an obligation to remediate. And if you're linked to it, you still have an obligation, but it doesn't involve remediation, but it involves trying to change the behavior or ending the relationship. So that's the consequence. This doesn't capture that right.
Kirsten?
I have really challenges in capturing what is meant in the first bullet point here. And I still have problems in understanding what is meant in the suggested rephrasing on the other page. I do understand what Dwight says. That seems clear to me. But that's a lot of words, so it seems to be really challenging to capture this in a short way. To be meaningful, I still believe that we need to capture it in a meaningful way, even if it would take some more words than we currently have here. Because for now, it doesn't add value, including it. Thank you.
Robin?
If we go back to the history of CSR, I would like to remind that it was considered that it was the company's social responsibility to make whatever it could to influence, to take action in its sphere of influence. I think that's what it is all about, or maybe I'm mistaken, but I think the whole question behind that is there. I mean, it was required. It is still required, by the way. Maybe we are not using these words anymore, but it's true that it is from a, I would say, NGO point of view or activist point of view, it is expected that especially multinational companies use their power in a positive manner to influence their supply chain or the use of their products and services. If I take the case of real estate and rental properties, you can imagine that the role of the lessor, you say? Yes, the lessor is to influence the way the lessee is using and operating and the premises. So, although he has no control, but there's a link. So, I think that idea of sphere of influence, I don't know if it's a better wording, but the idea should be kept in there.
So, just wanted to ask, whether in that second bullet, or excuse me, the first bullet the organization has, if we were to insert the organization has caused, comma, contributed to, or seen as contributing to, does that get at least one of your questions, Dwight, in terms of
Yes,
causality, being
Yes.
absent from?
Yes, I think the original language only needs a tweak or two. It's close.
Yeah, that was my sense also. But other comments, Michael?
Yeah, I'm still a bit confused by this idea of link to. I don't understand it. I wonder, Dwight, could you give me an example of link to that is not contributing?
Dwight?
Yeah, an example would be that you have as a supplier in your supply chain an organization that does bad things that is not because of you or necessarily related to you. So for instance, is caught using child labor in performing an activity, and you say quite correctly, but they weren't making anything for me. I didn't buy any of this stuff made with child labor. Well, that may be true, but because that is your supplier, you have certain responsibilities. That there's an international consensus that you have responsibilities with respect to your supplier, and you're expected to use your leverage to stop that activity or to reconsider your relationship.
Yeah, so Michael, I think what would occur to me is, I mean, let's just take a, unfortunate circumstance in Bangladesh, where, I think you could draw a distinction between, I think this is what Dwight is getting at, between those, companies that are sourcing their apparel, and we have a situation down in the supply chain. So I could see a difference between contributing to the unhealthy and the unsafe conditions in which the workers were subjected. But you certainly could be linked to that because you have sourced some of your material from them. So it's to me, it's a distinction between, I contributed to it because I knew about it and I wasn't willing to, I got a cheaper price because they didn't have the safety procedures in place. But clearly you can be linked to that because you are sourcing some of your material from an unsafe environment. So to me so I'm not, personally, I'm not troubled by this idea of you caused it, you contributed to it, or you're linked to it. I think there are different gradations of how involved and what your obligations would be. So that would be my explanation of how you get linked to something that you didn't actually contribute to it, other than by the fact that you buy product from that entity, perhaps even indirectly. But you clearly are linked to it. And I think the worldwide reaction to that particular circumstance clearly illustrated that companies who were sourcing from that did feel linked to it because they sought to, they coalesced around how to resolve some of these issues. So I don't know if that helps or not in terms of how one distinction.
I guess another example might be sports sponsorship, where you sponsor a sports person and they're caught cheating with drugs or something. You didn't cause them to do it, but you then, and often do, they disassociate themselves. Is that the sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay, well then that
Right.
makes perfect sense to me. Maybe it should be explained a little, that's all.
Just a clarification of something. So Daniel?
I think you're good questioning there, Michael. It's Daniel. I think actually on this point about is linkage really the right terminology? Maybe we are talking about an association rather than a linkage. I think you can make a linkage, 7 degrees of separation, and it becomes quite a sort of almost a sort of nebulous term, whereas an association is clearer in terms of maybe it's semantics, but I think it certainly helps me to better understand what this means.
If I could, Chelsea.
Thank you, Eric. Just a couple of points. On the notion of adding in cause to that first bullet point, this is an excerpt from the text on your page 22, but we actually do define, we bring in the term caused earlier, related to if an entity within the reporting organization has caused an impact, then defining the topic boundaries defined as within the organization or within the reporting organization. So this is where we are trying to give additional clarification in the cases where you would define a topic boundary outside of the reporting organization. So it's not quite as simple. I would just caution us against just adding caused into that first bullet point, because we would, I believe, want to then be defining the topic boundary as within the reporting organization, and this paragraph specifically deals with cases where the topic boundary is defined as outside the reporting organization. That's a minor point. I think absolutely we do need to make sure that we cover caused, contributed to, or linked to, or its cousins. The second point I would make is, listening to the conversation around the table, I would venture that maybe what we need here, if we do need more words, that maybe we need a couple of examples in this guidance, because once we talk through actually 1 or 2 examples of what contributed to or linked to could mean, I think it will be much easier for organizations to grasp the context of these bullet points. And I might suggest that those are a couple of examples we could mock up over lunch and come back and share with the group, if that would be useful, or that the group entrusts the Secretariat to do that with 1 or 2 members offline to further illustrate what's meant here.
Robin?
Just a more general comment which strikes me there. All this could apply perfectly to an industrial company. It doesn't really apply straightforwardly to a financial company. And the comment I'm making there would probably apply to most of the standards. I think it's an issue because there again, as long as the standard wants to address all sectors, but the problem is that the financial sector has a specific status. So I don't know how you can take that into account, but honestly, and I don't know if you agree, Daniel, but I mean, applying that to BT would be an issue. Most straightforward.
Dwight?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to two of the earlier comments. First of all, on the issue of linked and whether there's a better word, we're trying to align ourselves with international instruments already, and the word is linked, and so that would be important. Then on the other thing with what Robin said about sphere of influence, basically what happened was sphere of influence was a concept. The idea being if you could stop something and you had the power to do that, then you should do that. And then that would determine sort of your responsibility. And in the work of the UN Special Representative for Business and Human Rights, there was a number of studies and a very important paper that I think came out around 2008. And basically, it discussed the weaknesses of the sphere of influence idea, of which the most important weakness was that it was being used as a test for responsibility. So if you didn't have the ability to change it, you weren't responsible. And of course, this has a lot of problems. So in terms of what the thinking is that your responsibility is created by what you do. And therefore, if you cause something, you create responsibility. If you're contributing to something, you create responsibility. If you're linked to, you create responsibility. And the nature of these responsibilities are different in each case. If you're causing something, you have the ability to stop it. So there's no question about certain things. Contributing to poses a different question, and linked to poses a different question. But the whole point is responsibility is created by that. It's not created by whether you have something, you have the ability to influence something. And the concept of leverage, which is the refined version of sphere of influence, the ability to influence or bring pressure to bear, is still a concept, but it's not used as a determinant of responsibility. And so you see that both in the guiding principles and you see it in the OECD guidelines. And neither one of them, basically sphere of influence is not a guiding principle or a significant factor.
Yeah. Okay. Kirsten?
Just a short comment. In my opinion, this, as Dwight elaborates on, also are relevant to financial institutions, as they have influence through what kind of enterprises or any other things they are financing. So there is still a very clear link there.
Great. Okay. So what's our sense here? We've had a proposal to revise some wording. Personally, I don't think we need to do that, but it's what's the sense? I mean, Chelsea, I've heard what you said with regard to inserting caused. I don't think it hurts what was already said about caused up above. Personally, I think it makes it very clear. But I'm just one voice in this. But we're creating a problem for ourselves by continuing to defer and take up later. Later needs to arrive at some point. Which is fine if that's the sense of the board, but it'll change our timetable for concluding any of our work. But so any final comments here? Because I do want to raise this idea that, you know, we are talking in this area about guidance. We have received a number of other comments in guidance with regard to grammar, language, you know, what could be viewed by some as perhaps substantive changes, such as the one we've just described here. There could be others. And the challenge that we have is, since we didn't receive the comments in sufficient time to provide them to all members ahead of the meeting and for thoughtful consideration, we have a very practical problem with what to do with these comments from some of the members as it relates to the guidance. Anything related to the disclosure requirements, we will discuss thoroughly and have. But we're in an area now of guidance, and there are, you know, some examples that we have of major rewrites of the guidance. And the question is, you know, are we going to pause in our process and consider all of these comments and potentially just delay our ability to issue when we had planned to the exposure draft. And one of the proposals is that the Secretariat consider all of the comments, decide from their perspective, are these substantive content related? In other words, if somebody reads the revised language, are they going to come away with a different understanding of how to make their disclosures, which I would interpret as being a substantive change because it now changes the intent of the disclosure based on how the guidance is read. And so a proposal is that we allow the Secretariat to go through all of the comments received from all of you and make a determination as to which ones are grammatical and which ones, you know, appropriately improve the readability of the document and segregate those that actually have the potential for changing the intent of the disclosure, and then ultimately take me through all of these changes and say, you know, I agree as chair that these are, you know, improvements in how it is conveyed and improves the understandability of it and so on, but doesn't change the content. Because otherwise, we'll probably be faced with having to defer to another meeting approval if we want to approve the specific language of all the guidance that is being proposed.
Well, given the constraints we have, I first of all wanted to note that the whole business with cause, which I found absent there, does in fact occur earlier in lines 555 and 556. So I don't think we necessarily have to modify it there. The problem I think I'm having, and that I do not think we will solve today, is that when we say it's the question of distinguishing between the inside and the outside of the organization, which is what we're dealing with here in boundary. So it's quite possible for an organization to cause an adverse impact several tiers down in the supply chain, not even immediately. And the organization is causing that to happen. So I think that there is a slight problem. I don't think we have to fix this. I think that we can put this out as it is, and I think that it can be tweaked in the consultation process because you will get people coming in, and I think you need to think about it to get it exactly right. And this is very close, and I don't think we're going to get it any closer today.
Chelsea, and then Michael.
One other quick comment. If you recall, in G4, there was guidance around G418, very lengthy guidance, which included some diagrams around defining boundary. And following GSSB advice, we have pulled the majority of that guidance, and it will become a separate guidance document, which will be developed further. It's under development now, and we can share an initial version at the May meeting with the GSSB. And that would be the place possibly for us to be able to give some diagrams or examples or some more illustrative guidance for companies on how to interpret this concept.
Michael?
I think it'd be very helpful to add a couple of examples here. As Chelsea said, the fact that we can discuss this for half an hour and have different views about what it meant, I think just means it's unclear. And that if a couple of examples can clarify it, then I think that would be doing a great service. Sorry, just one other point, if I may, was in terms of process, yeah, I agree with what you said about, staff working it out and seeing what's made of it. I guess, and maybe this is just my nature from standard setting, but I would expect to see that draft with the changes from this one distributed to the whole committee rather than just to the chair.
Salama?
I have to say that I'm very happy with this wording proposed about boundary. I can live with this wording, and let's submit to the public comments, and then we can reflect or we can digest the comments, and then we can go back and rewording. But I really think, as a foreign, as not an English native speaker, for me it's quite clear. But I do have one comment on deleted content. In lines 659 to 672, I'm missing one sentence from G4. It's about medium. At the page 50 of G4 implementing manual, there's one sentence telling to the reporters that at least one medium web or paper should provide users with access to the complete set of information for the reporting period. And the sentence is not within this document. So it's about not changing the content, right? I'm not sure if it was intended to be deleted, but it's a very important part of G4.
Chelsea?
Yeah, it's a good point. We had removed some duplicative content in these areas, but also in the content index section in the general disclosures now, it's quite clear that you need to provide in one place links to all the content in the report, but that doesn't necessarily need to be in one medium, because it might be possible that some information would be in PDF form and that some information would be online, and that's why that text was deleted. The notion that everything needs to be accessible from one place has been carried through, and you'll see that in the general disclosures after lunch, but this was considered to be a bit outdated in terms of actually not reflecting the way that companies are reporting today.
Salama?
Well, we are stepping back to G3, and I do not agree with this deletion. It's very important. We are talking about readers that has no access for more than one medium all around the world. Employees or people from workforce who want to see the whole information of a sustainability report within only one piece. So I do not agree with the deletion.
Okay. Dwight, did you have further comments? Judy?
I had actually raised this as something that I thought needed to be deleted, this business that you had to have everything included in one medium. And I mean, I think that word is very, very important here. I mean, to say the opposite is to say that absolutely all disclosures must be made either on paper, in hard copy, or in some other form. And there are many other forms that it could take. And to me, that simply isn't the way that reporters provide reports, and it isn't the intention of that instruction. That instruction is to ensure that there is a kind of clear and accessible place where people who want to know, this is why there's a content index for one thing, to make sure that readers can understand where exactly they can find all the various bits and pieces that are being reported under GRI. I felt that restricting it to one medium was simply not what we meant by that instruction, and it was very outdated. So that's why I suggested it, and I think to kind of go back to saying it all has to be in one medium in at least one place is sort of, it's not the right idea.
Okay, Daniel?
The mining ministry of the province in Argentina puts all of its information on a cork board in its main office in northern Argentina. If you want to go find out about mining, it's all there, but you have to go all the way there to get it. So your word accessible, I think, is important. So as long as, my sense is, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a single medium, but it does have to be accessible to stakeholders, whatever that might mean, in whatever medium that stakeholder could get the information.
Okay. All right. So what I would suggest is that on this boundary question, do we have a sense that we want to agree with this change as identified in red? Do we want to change it to the first bullet inserting the organization has caused, recognizing that somehow that might impact previous wording? I'm not sure, I'm not clear on that, but any objection to? I would suggest that what I'm asking is, can we insert the word caused in front of contributed to in the first bullet and go with the rest of the changes that have been suggested and be done with this piece for now? Okay. What was the other? That was the one that said we would go back to, right?
Yeah, no, there was one earlier.
Oh, yeah. Go back to the first one.
Just one clarification, though, Eric, on that one point. We had mentioned that caused is actually separately dealt with earlier in this text, because when you talk about caused, when an impact is caused by the organization or an entity within the organization, then the reporting boundary needs to be defined as within the organization, and this paragraph specifically deals with outside of the organization. So I believe from Dwight, and Dwight's nodding, that we're okay to leave the text as is with these red amendments for the sake of public exposure, bearing in mind the need to possibly develop some examples or guidance during the exposure period.
Dwight?
Yeah, right now, I'm happy to have this go out for exposure with these changes we've made. I still am thinking that this distinction of putting cause only is inside the organization. I need to think about that some more, but I don't think we should wait for me to think about this. I might very well think about it and make a contribution to the public exposure or something.
So it just as it reads here. The first one, our action plan. The boundary. Yeah.
Yeah, this is so to accept these changes.
Yeah. So that one's okay.
Okay.
The one before that, we didn't conclude on. So this one. So the proposed action is that we will undertake a short time revision of some potential language, and we'll revisit this after lunch as part of the general section. So that was my takeaway from this piece. We still have this open question of how we're going to address the grammatical and other non-substantive suggestions, edits that members have made to the guidance post this meeting that we received just prior to the meeting but can't digest until post. So I'm happy to and would expect to share prior to publication for public commentary the final language, but I struggle with postponing our decision to go out for public commentary on the disclosure language outside of this meeting, only because I don't know when we can reconvene. We'd have to meet our timetable, we'd have to reconvene in the next 7 days. So I'm not quite sure I understand, Michael, how to practically deal with I'm happy to share what's happening, but I'm reluctant to defer the decision to go out for public commentary on the exposure draft, pending yet another review of all the detail. So if you could clarify that for me, that'd be helpful.
A mechanism I've seen used is it gets distributed to the entire committee at the same time as it's distributed to you, and there's a whatever period you've got, say it's 2 day or whatever it is, a turnaround time during which members can raise what they believe to be fatal flaws to you for your adjudication. I guess that's all I'm asking for.
Okay, I'll consider that during lunch. Is there anything else in this section that we need to code for before we adjourn for lunch?
There were actually. So these were the two, what we described as the points of relatively minor feedback, although important to get these right. They are fundamental concepts. We also had one GSSB member who raised 3 more substantive comments, I think, about the nature of the standard or the scope of the standard. And I know we are over time, we had discussed that the member felt quite strongly that these should be tabled for discussion with the GSSB. Several of them have been discussed previously, but this is really the opportunity to make a decision about whether they need to be reopened. So I will run through them and then hand over to Eric for group discussion. So the first of these is around the guidance of the reporting principles. So there was a suggestion to revise this for better clarity. And I think the Standards Division would agree that this work could benefit the overall product. However, we had asked the GSSB for previous feedback back in the end of January about to what extent should we be doing a cleanup and revision of the principal guidance. At that time, there was no indication that this should be a priority, but this may be open for further discussion. The second was the status of recommendations and guidance. So there was a suggestion that we should be a little bit more explicit in the introduction to the standards, making it clear that reporting requirements are to be considered in the context of recommendations and guidance, so that there is a stronger signal, I think, to users of the guidelines or the standards that they need, even though application of the guidance is not mandatory, that the expectation is that they read and understand things all together in the context. And the third point was a little bit of further revision to the concept of an SRS referenced claim. And the idea was that, if you remember, we had several versions ago had a proposal to require the application of the principles for defining report quality, even if you wanted to make just an SRS reference claim, and also to apply the management approach if reporting on a specific topic. And that has been raised again by a member. And I would turn it over. We have mocked up some text for what that third point would look like. So that would change this section on SRS reference claims. And instead of just saying you need to be transparent about which standards or sections of the standard you've used, that's it. We suggest you apply the reporting principles for defining report quality. We would actually make it a requirement that the reporting organization also reports its management approach and also replies with all reporting requirements, I presume, for the disclosures reported. That's what that change could look like, but I will turn it over to Eric and also to Michael Nugent if they want to elaborate on those points.
Okay, so let's go back a page and let's try to.
This is the page.
Huh? Yes, that's the page. Well, that's what I was going to get to, because I think, so I don't know that there's much to be done. I suggest revive better clarity around reporting principles. So, okay. On the second one, I think that's fine. I think it probably is an improvement to say that, we do expect people to read the recommendations and guidance when preparing the disclosure. So, is there anybody who thinks that's a bad idea? Okay, so we're done with that too. So the third one, let's now go forward. So on these reference claims, fundamentally the question is, to what extent do we want to require, if someone is going to make a referenced claim that they're using an SRS that we have written on a particular topic or topics, but something less than its totality, that we should say that if you're going to do that, then you shall report, apply the reporting principles, and you shall report on management's approach to whatever that topic is, and you shall, conform with the reporting requirements for disclosures as it relates to a topic specific. I personally, I think that's probably a good idea. I mean, I don't, let's have some discussion. So, Judy?
This topic of the what used to be called the levels of application is very, very close to my heart, and it's something that I really dearly wish we could have taken up in the context of this shift to standards. But to me, and I agree with you, Eric, that I think the specific recommendations, they sound like good ideas to me, but I think they need a working group to consider the whole sort of set of options around what we would ultimately want to do with the core and comprehensive options, as well as the SRS reference claims. That's outside the scope of this exercise, and it has pained me throughout the exercise to have to say we just have to defer this until such time as we can take it up, which I think is in the 2017-18 proposed work plan that we'll be talking about later in the meeting.
Just to clarify, so are you suggesting that we should remove this idea of SRS reference claims entirely? Or are you just objecting to now making a modification to something that already doesn't exist?
Right, I see what you mean. Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose I would prefer to just not have the SRS referenced claim option at all if it doesn't correspond directly to something that exists in G4, and if it doesn't, then let's get rid of it maybe. But considering that we've already been there, we've already had that conversation, I'd prefer not to complicate it by adding more kind of shall statements around it, and leave that to another time when we can look at the whole situation a bit more clearly.
So you had a clarification, Chelsea?
There was in G4 the concept of GRI referenced report, which is this other category, and I learned just the other day that about 30% actually of reports in our database do fall into this other category. I would just note for the GSSB that it's a little bit in the details, but if the GSSB agrees to these modifications, on point 333 up here around the application, the management approach, there's another level of detail actually which is needed behind this, which is important to understand the implications, because in our revised management approach, which Lara will take you through after lunch now, you don't just have the ABC of the DMA anymore, but you actually have defining the topic boundary is in there as well, and you have a lot more content and substance than we previously had. So we just need to be clear about the implication of requiring this. It's not just one or two lines on this is our management approach for the topic. There's actually a fair amount, unless we're trying to be specific about shall apply disclosure 3011, 3013, 3014A out of the management approach.
Kirsten?
I agree with Judy's comments to a very large degree here. I find it difficult to have a decision now on additional requirements that I don't really understand the implications of. As Judy says, this is a topic that we should review in full when we have concluded the this process. So I don't see the use of putting new requirements here for now. Thank you.
So just to clarify, this is a new, not entirely, but a new way of referencing, what somebody has done. The red is a further modification of what already is new. So there's new and there's newer.
But it's coming now this late in
I
the
understand.
process. That's what I'm saying about new requirements.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure because there's new and there's new. So, Michael?
Okay, so what people are going to see when this hits the street is that we've gone from a monolithic document to a series of standards. And they're going to say, well, what's that mean? That's the most important thing, right? And what does it mean? I'm not sure we're at all clear about that in the document itself. The document is mostly aimed, the foundation document is mostly aimed at preparation of sustainability reports, not at this third option. And a lot of the wording is almost inconsistent with this third option, right? So I know this is late, but I must admit I have raised this at every call that I can, and we just have had a compressed time frame to discuss this, which I think is the most important credibility issue for this board, is how we relate to the market what we've done with this, breaking this into a series of these, and how you can use this series of individual standards. And there are lots of questions that could be asked, like, why do we not allow one to say, I've done my emissions statement of emissions in accordance with SRS 505 or whatever the number is? Why do we not allow that? Have we thought that through? I'm not sure we have. And yet this is, I think, going to be the thing that is going to be most important in the release of this stuff. People are going to focus on it. And we don't have the answers. So, yes, maybe it's late, but I don't think we've had the time over past meetings to discuss this and think it through to the depth that we need to before going out with this major change.
Well, I'll take some exception. We have talked about this, and we arrived at this point before the red, some time ago. And so we can reopen it and have the discussion. Do we want to have SRS reference claims as part of the restructuring or not? But it's not as though we haven't discussed this, and I recognize that it may not have thoroughly discussed to the satisfaction of all board members, given the complexity of what we're trying to achieve. But it's been very clear to me, that we have more explicitly opened the door to having organizations use topic-specific standards for their particular reporting needs, not to the detriment of the belief that a full-blown standalone sustainability report, as envisioned by the comprehensive use of all the standards, is not the preferred. But it's a market reality that if we remain ambiguous about whether somebody could actually, they're going to do it anyway. And to some extent, in order to control our brand, particularly as we've gone to this segmentation of the various topic standards, this is, is this a sensible approach, at least at the get-go, to try to manage, what our expectation is about the use of our topic-specific standards? Because the alternative is we just say, you can't say anything that it's GRI if it's not the full-blown report. And that may or may not be in keeping with what we had talked about at the original conceptual idea of breaking up the guidelines into a series of interrelated and ultimately in a full use comprehensive set of standards. So Daniel?
Yeah, as I reread this proposal or section called SRS reference claims, I don't like the title, first of all. What is a reference claim? Maybe we should be referring to something more along the lines of partial use, or something that's more explicit to what you just mentioned. And really, I think it's a bit confusing. I don't think we should be generating confusion as to what it implies, and maybe we could just reduce it to part of the first paragraph along with the second sub-bullet point. If you're using this, partially explain what you're using and what you've applied, period, and not get into so much detail about the various ways that you can partially apply, because I think we're kind of losing ourselves into all the various uses that, as you say, some companies will do it anyway, and I don't think we should be addressing ourselves to all the possible ways that might happen.
Chelsea?
I would say there is some guidance below this, which explains a little bit more and gives an example, which is intended to make those first sub-bullets a bit clearer. I agree that they're quite hard to comprehend all at once. If we do end up adding in additional requirements to use this kind of claim. Possibly in a further iteration, we would want to go back to, if you remember, in January, we looked at a table in the in accordance section, which actually had the SRS reference claim in there as well. So it was clear which requirements were needed out of each of the standards. We took that out based on GSSB feedbacks at that time, saying that maybe we should be less restrictive about what organizations need to do. We just want them to be transparent about what they have used and haven't used. The only reason from our perspective maybe to be clear about the wording that can be used here is to make sure that this doesn't come across that there's a distinction between those that have met the in accordance criteria and the way that others can talk about this if they just picked and chose a couple of different items to report on.
Jürgen?
I do not think that this is a moment to reopen the chapter in total, the SRS reference claims that we have discussed earlier. I would stick for the time being to what we have discussed today. The question for me is more, can we agree with the amendments that are suggested here? In my view, these amendments contribute to clarification and are a positive step further. I personally would go along with them. I could accept them and close this chapter as a whole with the amendments.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Michael?
I'll just clarify, these are not my particular amendments as such, but my view is that a lot of the text in this foundation standard is aimed at preparation of a sustainability report rather than being clear that you can use partial application or whatever we call it. So I just think there is an issue when one reads the whole thing, if this is a big part of the change that we have not articulated that well in the document. I think there's a lot of changes actually would be needed to make it more clearly articulated rather than appear as an afterthought.
You'll get some objection to emphasizing the idea that we can just pick and choose, so that's...
But as you said, people will do it anyhow.
Well, I understand, but if they're... Well, which I think this helps do, you know, put some parameters on it. It's quite another to write a bunch of guidance that says, you know, to take them through how they can pick and choose, as opposed to if they choose to do that, this is what we expect of it. Which is, to me, there's a distinction between what we're trying to convey, which is, if you're going to appropriately apply what we believe to be the reporting of your impacts on society and so on, you have to do it in its totality. You can't do it individually. The reason that we're going down this road is that we recognize that there are other very specific stakeholders who have very specific interests that companies are being challenged to report on. And we simply want them to use our report, our standard for that reporting, with the idea, but not as a substitute for full reporting, which is the only way you get a meaningful, in my view, meaningful understanding of the company's overall impacts on society. I guess where do we stand? I just maybe I do another little straw poll. All those in favor of the language with the add-in of the red, signify by raising your hand. All those that would be in favor of keeping the SRA reference claims without the red, in other words, just the blue as it was originally intended. We're split, so go ahead. Chelsea.
Could there be a middle ground? So, I mean, this is not a all or nothing. It is possible that, for example, we say we want to be stronger on the fact that the reporting principles for quality are an expectation that they need to be applied, but we disagree with requiring. We want to say should apply the management approach. There is some room to maneuver, although I'm sensitive about recommending that given the time as well.
Okay, let's go to lunch. So I would suggest that we reconvene at, can we reconvene at 10 after? Try to get Caught up a little bit more? All right. So at 10 past the hour, we'll reconvene after lunch, and we have deferred a number of things which we will revisit. So thank you.